So when it comes to translating works from South Indian languages, to be very
Hmm.
specific, into English,
Yeah.
over the last 4.5 decades, you have been doing it. So, what are the changes that you have seen when it comes to the question of the number of people who are doing it, or the quality, or the volume, whichever way you take it? What are the changes that you have seen?
See, for one thing, um, there was no visibility whatsoever for a translator unless you are already an established creative writer. For instance, Kuvempu translated Shakespeare's Tempest and Shakespeare's Hamlet, you know, and Browning's The Pied Piper of Hamelin, you know. So these are all iconic works because it was done by established writers who are already established. Okay, there was some visibility, but translators per se and translation per se had no visibility. So much so that you don't even they never even used to print the name of the translator. It's as though the translation happened by itself. Udbhava. It sort of materialized on its own, as it were. Okay, so from there to printing the name of the translator somewhere, at least in the inside pages somewhere, on the fourth or fifth page in small print, right? From there, it was a great improvement. And from there, when I was director at the Sahitya Academy here in Central Sahitya Academy here, the translation center. This is something I could argue up for and print the name of the translator on the front page. Not in the same size as the author's name, but smaller, but at least there, on the front page. From there to see, Miss Daisy Rockwell, sharing the prize with Geetanjali Sri is really, a long journey, I would say. And so there is a lot of visibility, I would, and the activity itself is receiving a lot of attention in the press and in the general cultural politics of, today, which is a very welcome kind of a thing. And but largely it is translations into English that are receiving this kind of an attention. When it is when translations between Tamil and Kannada, or Telugu and Tamil and Malayalam, they've all been happening all along through institutions like Sahitya Akademi and local, the literary organizations. But it hasn't received the same kind of attention. But now, even here, I would say there have been many more awards, uh, for translations between languages and things like that. So that's a very welcome kind of a thing. And there's a regular review kind of a platform where books get reviewed. And that's also, all these are very positive signs for translations, I would say. And the only thing is, I feel academic institutions like universities and degree syllabus making bodies, they have to use these translations much more in their syllabuses, so that we read a Tolstoy's text, but we don't read who is writing in Kerala or Andhra Pradesh. We don't know anything about Volga, but we know a lot about many of the women writers outside. So this, I think, is an important step which has happened to some extent. And I would say, when I look back at my own career as an English teacher, the most significant point in my career, I would say, is when along with a couple of my colleagues in the Department of English, we introduced a paper called Modern Indian Literatures in Translation, where in our MA classes we taught Malayalam literature and Bengali literature along with Indian literature, along with Kannada literature, you know, as a compulsory paper that they had to read, in their courses, which was extremely well received by students because for and especially in today's university setup, the universities have opened their doors to non-urban and non-elite students, which is the right thing to do. And so there are the English classroom has really changed its face in the last 30 years. And a lot of students from disadvantaged backgrounds come to the English class, but with a lot of diffidence, with a lot of alienation, right? Because if you try and teach them only British literature, it's a very alienating experience. The language is alienating, the culture is even more alienating, right? Therefore, we found that introducing these texts, from India, from our neighbors, and from Kannada itself, created a lot of interest among students in the course itself, because motivation was not such a big issue in the class. They would all read, you know. Some of them would read even in Kannada. For instance, a lot of Malayalam texts have been translated into Kannada, and Tagore has been translated widely into Kannada. See, Gora was one of the texts, for instance, and Gora is there in Kannada. So, if they couldn't read in English, they would read in Kannada and come to class. And there was a greater interest in participating in the discussions, in the arguments, in the readings in class, and things like that. So, the entire question of motivation was addressed in a very meaningful way for teachers and students. So, this use of translated texts in syllabuses, I would say, is yet to happen, in a big way, in universities.
You have also done considerable work on Dalit and women writing into English.
I have taught two courses in the MA program, two optional courses. One was Dalit writing in English translation, and the other is women's writing in English translation. Um, Again, the principle was the same. The focus was more sociological. To discuss that, we found that it is good to kind of use uh, diverse texts. Therefore, we used her texts from Marathi that were available in English translation for the Dalit writing course. Texts from, like, for instance, Bama's Karukku was one of the texts. Right? And so short story, Devanur Mahadeva short stories, Sidlingaya's poetry, all this in English translation, right? We use these texts as ways of discussing, highlighting, writing from the margins, as it is, right? And that again found a lot of resonance among our students, because it is quite a considerable numbers of students. A number of students belong to those backgrounds world, and so for them it was a very enabling, empowering kind of an experience. It is so with women's writing also. And like the work of Susie Taru and Lalita, and not stalwarts like that, helped us to kind of put together a paper on women's writing, where many more texts were from Kannada, right? Therefore, all these texts helped us to, all these papers and all these issues helped us to create a greater relevance for yeah, teaching English, in a context like ours. Uh, See, for instance, what happens is we also have a Indian writing in English, no, where all the Narayan, R.K. Narayan, and in that generation, Raja Rao, Mulk Rajanand, all of them, and then of course there are the more newer ones. A lot of people have written, but at least in the initial stages, barring a few exceptions, largely it was urban India, which was the theme of Indian English writing, whereas translations brought another India into our consciousness, right? In the English departments, and that was a very important shift, which was enabled because and through in and through translations. So that way also it was very important sociologically, I would say, and ideologically, politically, it became an important step, I think, in the educational setup that I was working in. Yeah.
Coming back to your efforts into translation, you have translated U.R. Ananthamurthy's novel Sanskara into Swedish, right? I believe it's a collaborative effort, and how challenging it has been for you to translate.
Let me do offer a disclaimer. I don't know a word of Swedish, and my co-translator does not know a word of Kannada. Okay, so we got together, and he had used Ramanujan's translation of Samskara as a kind of a support, but there were several aspects, in that text which he couldn't understand, despite the translation into English, right? For instance, the very opening page, Pranashacharya brought his wife, who's an invalid, huh? Gave her a bath, brought her back to her bed, and made her touch his feet. Hmm? Now, my friend, my co-translator, couldn't understand what is this gesture of making her touch his feet. Is it a sexual gesture? Is it, what is it? Right? So, see, so you understand something literally, but you may not understand it culturally, right? What does it mean? Okay, so there were several such what I might call gaps in understanding. See, partly because Sweden has not very actively negotiated with India, right? In terms of its history, unlike, let us say, Germany, for instance, where German scholars, have come to India for long, many centuries, and British and so on, and more recently American also through all this South Asia studies and these kinds of programs. But Sweden has kind of kept aloof, right? And so India is just some land out there kind of thing. So one may understand the language, but not necessarily its cultural, nuance. So my job was largely to fill him in on those cultural, nuances, and that is one aspect, of in quotes. I was a native informant. I would, it's a very questionable term, so I'm using it in quotations. But I was also more than a native informant, of course. We did other things with it. See, for instance, in a novel, there are shifts in the narrative. Hmm? There is a certain mood, a certain situation. From there, there's a certain comment. So I would be worked out. Okay, now let us read the first chapter. Hmm? Now tell me, where do you think there is a shift? There's an important, or what do you think is important in this chapter? Which comment, or which line, or which description? Something, anything that strikes you. That way, we built a supra segmental level of understanding of the novel, right? Where, the tone, the mood, the higher aspects of what makes a novel into a novel. Mhm. That those aspects, the tonalities. Is she being sarcastic? Is she being sympathetic? Is it a barb, huh, at what he has felt? You know, so has he understood it in the same terms, right? So That was a very, very fascinating experience for me. That we built into our discussion this higher level of at which the subtler aspects of a literary text, functions, right? And that was made possible through this kind of a collaborative effort. And I did the same. I translated a Swedish novel by Torgny Lindgren called The Way of a Serpent into Kannada as Havina Donku. Hmm? The twists of a snake, if you please. That's a rough translation. So, which is set in 18th century Sweden, where the only book they had seen was the Bible. It was that kind of a, in a pre-modern society and a very feudal society, and how they face up to the cold, the hungry kind of times that they go through. Hmm? What happens to human relationships in such a context, how exploitative class can be, etc. Very, very powerful novel, right? Short novel. And again, I had to do the same thing with my collaborator, Hans Shostrom, right? Not everybody gets an opportunity like this, but when we got it, I must say we used it to kind of experiment with all these things. It's not that we knew how to do it, but as we talked and as we kind of discussed and as we evolved as translators of the text, we kind of grew into the text so much that it was a very beautiful experience, I must say.
One more interesting translation is Sri Jiddi Krishnamurthy's work into Kannada.
In the 70s and 80s, there used to be big gatherings here in Lalbagh and places like that, and we would all flock to listen to him. His thinking was so fresh, so different, and in some ways so freeing that I sent my children to the Jiddu Krishnamurti Foundation School. But some of the teachers in the school also felt that all his thinking is only there in English. So it would reach larger groups if it can be translated. And so they were kind of trying it on a very kind of a tentative kind of ways. To one or two teachers would get together, maybe translate an essay here, translate an essay there, that kind of a very uh, limited effort, I would say. And so they wanted to kind of see how best they can make it into a larger kind of a more effective project. So then some of us, my friends and I, we said, let's put our energies together and see what we can make out of it. So Professor O. L. Nagbhushan Swami, Professor H. S. Raghavendra Rao, and Murari Ballal, like two, three, four of us got together. And with the help of the KFI Foundation and its office bearers and people who are involved with it, like Krishnanath ji and Satish Inamdar and a whole lot of others, we kind of got together and chalked out a whole project out of, to do that. And so there were some 15 to 20 books that got translated into Kannada, in that period of 3 4 years. And they were running a newsletter, in his name, Anudina Chintana. And that also got a whole lot of translations in Kannada and so on. The interesting thing there was, you see, like when you translate Krishnamurti into Kannada, in Kannada, the language of spirituality is very rich and familiar. Hmm? Now, how do you translate something like self into Kannada? Is it Atma? Because he is kind of he's rebelling against given notions, given definitions of this Atman, etc., etc. He is not on the same track of spirituality, right? He's kind of he's writing against the grain. So, how do you use language which is so already, needed, prepared, made ready to talk about spirituality, to say something new about the same things? That was the challenge. He could do it in English, but in Kannada, we had to kind of find different ways of doing it, you know, in other words, as it were, in other ways, as it were. That was the challenge. And given, Raghavendra Rao and Swami and, their sensitivity to such issues, we made an excellent thing out of that translation. And also, we used to hold trained translators and hold annual gatherings. The KFI used to hold annual gatherings, and we would all participate and provide some support to what they were trying to do, which was a very productive and very fulfilling experience for all of us. Yeah.
Can you take us a bit through about your current projects that you are working on? Could you please tell us about it?
You see, I'm working on two projects which are 1 millennium apart. One is a 10th century, Jain text in Kannada called Vadharadhanam. And this is a set of short stories, a cluster of short stories about, uh, you know, sublime death. Okay. The Jain practice of Salekhana, about which our historian um, Shetter has written extraordinary books. Okay. And then I'm doing this iconic Kuvempu's novel, right? Which is a 20th century uh, production. Now, nothing can be as different as these two things, right? So, a large part of the 10th century work was done during COVID, right? And that was very helpful for the stories about death. So,
Okay.
so my my inner world and the outer world, there was a lot of you know match, and I didn't have to struggle too much, etc. So, but uh, it's very, very challenging to read 10th century Kannada. And and also, it's a multilingual text, like Indrabai. But the multilingualism is more from Sanskrit and Prakrit and old Kannada, older Kannada, let me say, and old Kannada, right? And therefore, I have had to seek the support of people who could translate the Sanskrit verses. And, Dr. Shankar Rajaraman has helped with those verses. And then there are several Prakrit verses. And therefore, Dr. Suhas Mahesh has helped me with those verses to translate them. And I have done the Kannada part. And it is actually the work of many people, not just me. Though it may, if you want a name to put the blame on, I can take it. But the credit is shared with everybody, who has pitched in so many several different ways. People have read and commented on the drafts and things like that. But it's still in process. That whole text. It's also being brought out by the Murthy Classical Library of India series, and so it is still, getting edited and so on. And that is one part of it. And for for that text, I needed to do a transmigration. This time it is transmigration, all right. In the sense, the Jain, it's a text which is born out of that, Jain religious universe, and which was not a very familiar universe to me prior to taking up the translation. And I had to really work quite hard to enter that world and have some sense of familiarity and depth and understanding. And then the Kuempu text is it is his magnum opus. It's not for nothing that it's his magnum opus. It's all of 700 pages and a novel, an epic novel with many strands of coming together into one epic novel. So there are stories of four or five different sets of characters, right? And to track them through the 700 pages, you know, the stories of the hero of this novel is a dog. Not being a pet lover, you know, for me it really meant trying to, get out of myself and to be a dog for some time, you know. And so the vocabulary you need to describe the dog, the different parts of its body, its movements, you know, its fierceness, so many things. It's a whole ethos, so that, for instance, so it's so rich in with animal life. There's a whole like very typical. It's Kuvempu has opens his novel by this most profound statement you will ever find. He says, "Nobody is important here, and nobody is unimportant." It is that inclusive. Okay, it's that inclusive. Yeah, his very famous poem is "O Nanna Chetana, Agu Ni Aniketana." Agu is become. Niketana is home. Aniketana is get out of the bounds you have bound yourself with, right? And that's what he does in the novel. He has just broken all bounds and uh, looked at people's lives, and from all classes, castes, and so it's a fascinating epic novel. Okay. So I experience this sense of becoming aniketana, Yeah, all my known worlds, I've had to grow out of them in order to get into the worlds that he's inviting me into. And I can't tell you what a treat to my heart, to my head, to my hand this has been. And I think I am the most fortunate person.
You started this conversation by
Hmm.
saying your mother tongue is Tamil. You have become so naturalized Kannadiga. If normally when we talk, right, we give examples from our mother tongue, some specific phrases and all. You are giving examples of Kannada phrases.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. See, only the lullabies, some of the lullabies I sing for my grandchild in Tamil, you know. And when if you kind of, you know, if a cat comes near me, suddenly I find myself saying, "Hey, po, po," and not hogo. So only for the very, very, close to my being kind of experiences, I use Tamil. But largely it is Kannada, because Kannada, I would say, is my first language. And English my second, Hindi my third, Tamil my fourth. In terms of uh, what is it? Competence and use of language. This is the order, because I'm married to a Kannada family, so largely I decided I will speak Kannada at home. So, and I have felt absolutely at home in Kannada. So, my dreams are in Kannada, for instance. So it's like that. I joined the University Department of English here in Bangalore in the 90s, in the 1990. There was it was already, they had a paper called Theory and Practice of Translation or something like that, and there were just about three books, three very uninteresting theoretical books on translation in the library, and it was all around that, and but the teachers themselves taught it interestingly with examples, right? It's the examples which held the course together. So gradually, like I also became a part of that team, and I continued, and then I was able to introduce and change a little bit and so on. So over nearly 18 years I taught that paper in the university department, and like it was such a fun class, like there was no problem with attendance. There was no, like students would come and do their own thing in the class. It was a lot of fun. So I remember one of the times when like we said, can we translate a song? How do you translate? Do you translate it as song or as just a few lines? Then we said, no, 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 song should be a song, whether it's in Hindi or Kannada. Then so I said, okay, shall we do an example? So we said in class, we decided there is this song from Anokhi Raat, Ohore Tal Mile Nadi ke Jal Mein. So it goes something like this, you see. सूरज को धरती तर से, धरती को चंद्रमा, धरती को चंद्रमा, पानी में सीप जैसे, प्यासी हर आत्मा, प्यासी हर आत्मा, ओ मितवारे, प्यासी हर आत्मा, बूंद चुपी किस बादल में, कोई जाने ना, हो रे ताल मिले नदी के जल में. So we chose this. And we said, okay, shall we all translate it together? Huh? It was such fun, each one. First, we did our own versions and then compared notes. And then on the board, we had one common version, which we improved and improved. And by the end of the class, we had this for that stanza. Something like, ಸೂರ್ಯನಿಗೆ ತಪಿಸಿದೆ ಭೂಮಿ, ಭೂಮಿಯ ಬಯಸಿದೆ ಚಂದ್ರ, ಸೂರ್ಯನಿಗೆ ತಪಿಸಿದೆ ಭೂಮಿ, ಭೂಮಿಯ ಬಯಸಿದೆ ಚಂದ್ರ, ಭೂಮಿಯ ಬಯಸಿದೆ ಚಂದ್ರ, ಒಮ್ಮಿತುವಾರೇ, we translated it as o ಗೆಳೆಯಾರೇ, ಕಡಲ ತಡಿಯ ಚಿಪ್ಪಿನ ಹಾಗೆ, ಬಾಯಾರಿದೆ ಆತ್ಮ, ಯಾವ ಮೋಡದಿ ಯಾವ ಹನಿಯೋ, ಯಾವ ಮೋಡದಿ ಯಾವ ಹನಿಯೋ, ಕಂಡೋರಾರಯ್ಯ, ಹೊರೆ ತಾಲ್ ಮಿಲೆ ನದಿ ಕೆ ಜಲ್ में, नदी मिले सागर में. How is that?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. It's beautiful. Thank you very much for your valuable time. It has been really
Yeah.
enriching to, listen to you.
No, it is. I enjoyed talking to you, and imagining all the other listeners. Feels good to be talking about something that I have just loved doing.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. I wish you the very best.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Bye.
Okay. Thanks a lot.